In recent years, housing costs have skyrocketed across Europe, affecting cities from Paris to Warsaw, Dublin to Athens. An increasing number of Europeans are finding it difficult to secure affordable housing. Rent prices have soared, neighbourhoods have undergone gentrification, and public spaces have been privatised, pushing more people towards homelessness or unstable living situations.
Rent in Manchester is now so expensive that students like Ella have had to leave the city.
Notably, this housing crisis isn't just impacting the most vulnerable populations. It's now also hitting middle-income families hard.
This privately rented house costs nearly £600 a month.
The bath has a defective seal all around the edge.
Since 2014, both house prices and rents have been on a steady rise, a trend that continued even through the COVID-19 pandemic. Unlike in past economic downturns, the demand for housing actually increased during the pandemic, fueled by prolonged lockdowns and a shift towards working from home. Just as the economy started to pick up in 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine introduced new financial challenges for governments and exacerbated the cost of living crisis for many households. In today's video, we delve deeper into Europe's housing situation to find the root causes, highlighting a few possible solutions to this growing yet underreported crisis. From 1960 to 2015, Europe's population surged by 25% to reach 500 million. But the construction of new homes was cut in half. For decades, there hasn't been sufficient housing to meet demand, leading to soaring property prices. This has made the goal of homeownership an increasingly distant dream for many Europeans. Over the past 10 years, rent prices in the EU have climbed by 19%. By 2021, half of the EU's population was spending 40% or more of their disposable income on housing. This trend is effectively pushing ordinary people out of the housing market in major European cities. Eurofound reports that younger Europeans are bearing the brunt of this crisis. They're staying at home with their parents for longer periods, are more likely to be renters rather than homeowners, and often feel forced to pass up on better job opportunities in more prosperous areas simply because they can't afford the housing costs. This situation is particularly troubling for cities relying on the vitality and innovation of young people to stay competitive. So, what's driving this housing crisis? The housing crisis is the result of several interconnected issues. The COVID-19 pandemic, alongside escalating energy costs and global inflation, has put additional strain on rental prices and led to a significant reduction in new housing developments. For example, Germany is anticipating a 32% decline in construction activity from 2023 to 2025. Environmental concerns, such as nitrogen pollution and greenhouse gas emissions from construction projects, also play a role in exacerbating the housing shortage by further restricting new developments. The war in Ukraine hasn't made things any easier. For all the heartfelt sympathy that greeted the Ukrainian newcomers a year ago, their arrival has been the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Providing shelter for the refugees has mopped up almost 2/3 of the €30 billion that the influx cost EU governments in 2022. And the uncertain duration of their stay adds to the challenge of addressing the housing shortage. Another major problem exacerbating the housing crisis is the large number of empty homes across Europe. While estimates and definitions differ among countries, in 2016, about 1/6 of European houses were reported vacant. Many investors prefer leaving properties vacant to avoid maintenance costs and complications associated with tenant eviction when property values increase. The influence of property development and management groups who have advocated for such practices further drives up rental and property prices. Additionally, the conversion of residential units into Airbnb rentals, particularly in tourist-dense areas, has made rents and mortgages unaffordable for many. This situation is aggravated by high inflation and increasing energy bills, pushing more people into precarious living situations or, in extreme cases, homelessness. A new report has estimated about 1 million people are homeless on any given night across Europe. The Federation of National Organizations Working with the Homeless, FINSA, said the figure, which only reflects the most visible forms of homelessness, highlights the failure of European countries to make housing a fundamental right, several deep-rooted problems contribute to the housing crisis, including discrimination by landlords against renters from diverse ethnic backgrounds and those with disabilities, the forced eviction of tenants holding older, more affordable leases, and the influx of foreign investors and tourists looking for short-term accommodations. Additionally, some buildings are in such poor condition that they're nearly uninhabitable. The situation is further strained by increased migration in certain countries, like the Netherlands. Generally, the focus of investments on profit rather than on meeting housing needs makes it increasingly difficult for vulnerable groups and the average renter to find affordable housing. In response to the cost of living crisis, central banks worldwide have hiked interest rates, a move that reversed a decade-long trend of housing price hikes in 2022, according to Swiss bank UBS. This might be a glimmer of hope for the housing market at large, but it's bad news for prospective homeowners, as interest rate hikes mean steeper mortgages. What's more, one of the core issues that makes housing unaffordable, the shortage of suitable homes, is still unresolved and might have been worsened by the cost of living crisis. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, responding to the housing shortage by erecting new buildings is difficult, mostly due to regulatory and space constraints that are particularly acute in larger cities. Building new homes has also become substantially more expensive in the past decade, particularly since the start of the pandemic. The industry bounced back in 2021, but last year saw another decline in the number of residential buildings approved for construction, even if the numbers are still significantly higher than pre-pandemic levels. Across Europe, governments have taken many other measures in the last years and months to tackle the European housing crisis. Unfortunately, policies such as rent subsidies still differ widely across and within countries. Some cities have tried to address the shortage by turning commercial and office buildings that emptied out during the pandemic into social housing, but that approach isn't widely available, as not all cities have public social housing. The Netherlands has, amongst others, announced new rent regulations as well as a residential building program that aims to create 900,000 homes by 2030. But these plans are now under question, as they could raise construction costs and interests, predicted to make the construction of new housing units more expensive in the coming years. Spain has also implemented a program to requisition vacant properties for social housing and has placed restrictions on tourist accommodations, which has helped to redirect housing supply back to residents. Yet, caution should be exercised when applauding these measurements, because who knows whether they'll stick or not, especially since the housing crisis is continually being used as a political tool by right and left-wing politicians alike. Addressing these multifaceted issues in the housing sector requires more comprehensive policy changes to ensure affordable housing for all. The housing crisis is a complex challenge that requires collaborative efforts from governments, developers, communities, and citizens alike, as well as an all-inclusive approach encompassing both short-term relief and long-term structural changes. In order to tackle this predicament, governments should incentivize the construction of affordable housing units to meet demand. This might involve streamlined regulations, tax incentives, and partnerships with private developers. Investments in social housing should ensure that citizens have access to quality housing regardless of their income levels. Cooperative housing models, where residents collectively own and manage properties, can also provide affordable and sustainable housing solutions while fostering a sense of community.